Hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to the second edition of Breaking News for this Wednesday, the 16th day of April, 2025. And we're coming at you a little bit later today because we've been waiting all day for a response from the three headlines that we gave you early this morning, actually 5:30 in the morning Pacific time. Let's remind you of what the headlines were. In swift reversal, Witkoff says any nuclear deal must eliminate Iran's enrichment weaponization. Some of the Times of Israel. The Times of Israel accused Witkoff of backpedaling from what he said the night before about Iran's program. In other words, what does he mean by this? He's so ambiguous. So they accused him of changing his mind overnight. All right, so we had that statement. Then this from the Jerusalem Post. Iran says its right to uranium enrichment is non-negotiable. In other words, you can't tell us anything about our desire to enrich uranium. It's non-negotiable. Our right to do it. You can't try to stop us. You can't talk to us about it. We're not even going to talk about it. It's like we're not going to talk about our missile program. We're not going to talk about, our spreading terrorism across the world. All we want to talk about is the sanctions you have against us, so you could dilute them. Then finally, we had this headline: Amateur envoy Witkoff's diplomatic slips risk U.S. security. This is from Virtual Jerusalem. And what they were saying is what so many others are saying. What is this amateur doing here? He's amateur with Russia and Putin in the Ukraine situation. He's an amateur with Hamas. He's already talked about being duped once by Hamas. And then with Iran, the same thing is true there with the U.S. And so that's where we left. I was waiting to hear something today from the United States and the White House responding to this, but there was nothing, crickets. But we did have these headlines. Now get this from the Jerusalem Post. International Atomic Energy Head Grossi warns Iran is not far from a nuclear bomb. Not far from a nuclear bomb. Headline number two: Iran shifts its tune on a nuclear deal, downplaying optimism. In other words, they don't think it's a good idea. They don't think it's going to work. Then headline number three is from the real leftist Times of Israel. Listen to this. No, Mr. President, Gaza's genocidal terrorists don't wink at their hostages or show any sign of love, and Iran's nuclear ambitions can't be easily solved in talks led by an overextended non-expert. All right, so here's the question. What in the world is the U.S. waiting for? Let's go to the headlines and let's read the stories here. First of all, Grossi, he's the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy, agency. He's been in Iran since today, and he's warned that on Wednesday that the country is not far from a nuclear bomb. This is from Le Monde, the French paper. Iran has the pieces, and they could eventually put them together one day. All right. He arrived in Tehran on Wednesday evening and met with the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. One of the main points of contention between Iran and the U.S. administration is who will oversee the implementation of a new nuclear agreement if one is signed. While Iran insists the IAEA should be the sole body responsible for monitoring any agreement, the U.S. administration remains undecided. Behind the scenes, Israel is pressuring the U.S. to ensure that Washington itself supervises any deal. In his interview with Le Monde, Grossi remarked, "Without us, any agreement is just a piece of paper." So here's the takeaway. Iran is not far from a bomb. What else do we need to hear? And they won't negotiate on their nuclear program. And they won't talk about stopping their enrichment of uranium. And then we have this headline, number two: Iran shifts its tune on nuclear deal, downplaying optimism. Iran's government cannot afford to wait for a deal with Washington, Iran's government spokesperson Fatima Mojahani said. After a week of optimism, Iran appears to be slightly less optimistic about a possible deal with the U.S. It's unclear if this is in reaction to U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff's recent statements or an attempt to downplay the second round of the talks expected to take place soon. Iran can't afford to wait for a deal, she said. What she means is Iran has economic needs, and if a deal doesn't happen soon, the door might close, apparently. Mohajani said the government's position aligns with that of the leader of the Islamic Revolutionary, Ayatollah Khamenei, who said the national problem should not be tied to negotiations, the state media report. And so basically they're saying, look, we don't feel very optimistic about things either. After just a few days of saying, well, everything's constructive, we're moving forward, we're all on the same page. Then with some of the statements that have been made by Witkoff, which can mean anything and everything, they don't think they're on the same page anymore. So now they're kind of backpedaling that as Iran about the possibility of getting an agreement. And then from the leftist Times of Israel, this one's classic. Know your enemy. Trump must wise up fast to inhumane Hamas and the ruthless Iran. And it says, no, Mr. President, Gaza's genocidal terrorists don't wink at their hostages or show any signs of love, and Iran's nuclear ambitions can't be easily solved in talks by an overextended non-expert. One of the less, and the story goes like this. One of the less noticed but very telling moments in U.S. President Donald Trump's Oval Office press conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week came when the president was asked two questions in quick succession. First, about the familiar subject of exactly how he was going to get the hostages out of Gaza, and then about why he thought his just revealed initiation of direct talks with Iran would yield a better deal than the 2015 agreement he inherited, denounced, and abandoned in his first term. He initially gave a fairly brief and unremarkable answer to the hostages question, then offered an even briefer response to the question about Iran, the day's hot subject, saying only that his planned New Deal would be different and maybe a lot stronger. But then, this is really interesting, unprompted, he returned to the hostages issue and began musing at length about what the freed hostages with whom he had just met have told him about the conditions in which they were in. Trump came into the office admirably promising to end wars rather than start them. But as the article says, that can't be done and won't be done unless or until he grasps the scale of the challenge. Where Hamas is concerned, the president has publicly expressed bafflement at Hamas's behavior, his struggle to understand its motivations and actions, and what he and we are up against has also been mirrored in his airy talk about evacuating Gaza's wonderful people while somehow separating them from Hamas, and in the words and deeds of the two officials he is charged with trying to solve the crisis, immensely exacerbating the concern that the president and at least some of his most trusted officials simply don't get the ideology, motivation, and genocidal ambitions of Hamas or Hezbollah or that of their state sponsor is handling now. That is Iran. Now, of Trump's outreach to the Ayatollahs, we have the ubiquitous Mr. Witkoff again at the helm. The president blithely asserted on Monday, 2 days after Witkoff held his first round of talks with the Iranians, we've got a problem with Iran. I'll solve that problem. It's almost an easy one. It's really simple, Trump said. He went on to declare they can't have a nuclear weapon. But as the writer of this article says, but it's not really simple. This regime in Iran not only can't have a nuclear weapon, it also cannot have the means to attain one, ever. Witkoff, untenably cramming the talks with Iran in his calendar while also overseeing Gaza negotiations and the small matter of the Russia-Ukraine war, and hitherto unfamiliar with the specifics of Iran's decades-old rogue nuclear program, does not appear to recognize this or even to recognize who or what he's dealing with. His first interaction with the Iranians, Witkoff enthused to Fox on Monday, was positive, constructive, compelling. And the next round of talks, he confidently predicted, would focus on verification of the enrichment program and ultimately verification of weaponization. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei soberly pronounced on Tuesday that the order of the day was neither exaggerated optimism nor extreme pessimism, while doubtfully laughing into his beard at the arrogant amateurism of those Americans. All right, here's where we're at. The whole world is seeing the U.S. amateur hour here. No statement is yet from the White House on Iran. What more do we need? Indeed, what more do we need? It's very, very frustrating. Hopefully, something will be said soon with response to these statements by Iran. They're not optimistic there's going to be any conclusion on the talks. Number two, the enrichment of uranium is a non-issue. We're not going to even put it on the calendar. We're not going to talk about it. We do what we want. This is our responsibility, our call. Stay out of our domestic affairs. And so the question is, what in the world are they supposed to talk to Iran about if Iran doesn't have the weapons, their nuclear weapons on the table as an issue, or the missile production, or anything else, their state sponsoring of terrorism? What in the world do you talk to them about? Actually, there's nothing you can talk to them about. And that's what's been said from the very beginning. And everybody's scratching their head or pulling their hair out saying, please, U.S., get real. See what's going on. These people are saying, laughing in your face. They're saying, take this, take that. Is the United States going to continue to take it? Well, I hope not. And I doubt very seriously they will. So let's hope and pray that soon we'll have a response from the U.S. And like this article says, like everybody else has been saying, there's only one response that's going to work, and that is a military attack on Iran's nuclear program to the place it can send it back years and years and years. With their missile program, everything else needs to be eradicated, needs to be basically taken apart. The U.S. has the ability to do this with Israel. Let's see if they'll go through with it. All right, we'll keep praying. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. We're sorry again, we're too late today, but it's just we're waiting to hear from the U.S. Didn't hear anything. Hopefully, we'll hear something by tomorrow morning. Again, until then, may the Lord richly, richly bless.